Their phones on silent. I just got a notification that was very loud, so it might be to tell everyone else. All right, so thank you everyone for coming to this very special treat we have today. And I won't say much, but I do want to just introduce our guest today. This is Dr. Glodel Mezilas. Very grateful to have you here. He's a professor in diplomatic history at the School of Haitian School in the Haitian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's authored 13 books. I am struggling to write one book. He's authored 13 books on politics, culture, and identity in the Caribbean and Latin America. He's also served the Haitian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in a number of capacities. And I'm very much looking forward to his talk today on a global South perspective on the conflict in Ukraine. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I'm very delighted, very honored to be here in this prestigious and distinguished School of Diplomacy and International Relations to share with you some ideas, some reflection about the current war in Ukraine, from our perspective. And thanks so much, Dr. Rodney Smith, Dean of School of Diplomacy and Dean of School of Law, this university. Thanks so much, Professor Martin Edwards and Professor Joseph Nelson for the excellent organization of this lecture. I am very happy for his kindness, his politeness toward me. And I thank you so much, Professor, personnel of the university, the school, for giving me some of your time in order to share some reflection about the current war in Ukraine. The title of my conversation is Russian-Ukrainian War and the Crisis of International Order, thinking from the Global South. There are two ideas that will be at the center of my reflection. The first idea is that this war is a geopolitical tension between great power competition for the domination of territory. That's to say, this war between Russia and Ukraine is a great power competition for Eurasia. It is a competition between Russia and the West. This is the first idea. The second idea is that this war gives way to a new international order. This is what I call the apolarity. This is an apolar international order. To my perspective, we won't have a multipolar or a bipolar or a unipolar world. It will be a world, an apolar world. The idea of apolarity means that there won't be any hegemony. There won't be a multipolarity in the sense that there is a formation of alliances. This is the second idea that I am going to develop. And to develop both ideas, which are the center of my reflection, I will use the global South perspective. This means that I will take into consideration the notion of colonialism, domination, periphery, resistance of the developing countries regarding the current world order. When I say I will use the perspective of global South, this means that the reaction of the developing countries to the war in Ukraine is structural. It is not a reaction. It is not a pro-Russian reaction or an anti-Western reaction. It is a reaction that calls for a new structure of international order. That I call the apolarity. Or I can use a term in the Caribbean region. This is the creolization of the world order. The order without centers, without hegemony, an order that implies we have new rules, new principles. This is the core argument that I'm going to develop. And to develop these arguments, first, I'm going to raise the epistemological and the methodological problem. Because if we have to study international problem, as students, as professors, we have to raise the methodological and epistemological problem. After raising this problem, my presentation will be divided into two parts. The first part, I will analyze the Russian, Western, and Chinese narrative on the war. This is the first part. The Russian narrative, the Western narrative, the Chinese narrative on the war, the first part. And the second part, I will develop to you the concept of apolarity. Why do I speak of apolarity? Because Russian, the Chinese, even some international scholars, they are talking about the multipolarity, the world of multipolarity. I think that we'll have an apolarity world, according to my conceptualization. And all of this I will do from the global South perspective, because to my perspective, to my mind, the position of those countries, of the developing countries, it is a position that implies a new concept of international order. That's the real argument perspective. Let's begin with the methodological and epistemological problem. We have two words. We have two words. There is a concrete war, a real war, a war that creates casualties, displacement, that creates a energy crisis, food crisis. Is current war, visible war. But there is another war. This is a war of narratives, a war of discourse, a war of interpretation of the war. We have two wars. The war in itself as a political reality, but there is a war of interpretation, of perception, of narrative. And this is where I'm going to focus my intervention. The war of narrative implies that not only there is a war in itself, but we have three narratives on the war. The Russian narrative that justify the war for security reasons. This is the narrative, the Russian narrative. They justify the war for security reasons. But I will develop this narrative. There is also the Western narrative that condemns the war on the basis of international law and geopolitical concern. The Western narrative condemns the war on the basis of international law and geopolitical concern. It's the narrative of the Western. There is also the Chinese narrative. This is what I call Chinese ambiguity. It is very difficult to decipher, to understand the narrative position, the Chinese position on the world. The Chinese ambiguity is based on geopolitical considerations. I could say there is a four narrative. This is the global South narrative. This narrative is based on neutrality and non-alignment. But this is from the global South that I'm going to study those narratives. And I would like to, there is an important question. What is the nature of the war? And what is the nature of the war of interpretation on the war? This is epistemological, a methodological problem. should we focus our attention on the war in itself or on the narrative on the war? As methodological problem, how and which data, facts must we collect to study the war? As epistemological problem, it's a problem that deals with how we construct knowledge, what categories. As epistemological problem, which theories, concepts, paradigms should we mobilize to study the war of narrative? There is a paradox. Many scholars who speak about the war don't emphasize this paradox, the war in itself and the war of narratives. And I think that to solve this problem, the problem that is between the war in itself and the war of narrative, I use the theory of interpretation as it is presented in hermeneutics. According to the philosophy of interpretation, hermeneutics, it is said that there is no interpretation without prejudices. There is no analysis without traditions. The war is always a construction of the language. There is no war in itself. There is a war for perception, for interpretation. There is a war for the narratives. And so we cannot differentiate. It is very difficult to differentiate the war in itself and the narrative in themselves. That's why I think that the hermeneutics allows us to study every narrative, because every narrative is a construction, is a linguistic construction of the reality of the world. As scholars, we have an epistemological problem. I think that every narrative constructs the world. There is two authors who wrote a book, Peter Berger, Thomas Luhmann. The book is called The Social Contract of Reality, a treatise in the sociology of knowledge. They show that the reality is constructed through theories, categories. Hermann Habermas, the German philosopher, wrote a book very important. It is called Knowledge and Interest. Every knowledge is connected to interest. Every lecture, every perception is a construction of the reality. There are some very important books in international relations. For example, the book of Robert Jervis, which called Perception and Misperception in International Politics. François Debris, a book, Agency and Politics in a Constructed World. This means that the international relation or the international politics is always a social construction. We cannot avoid prejudices, ideology, because every interpretation of the war, it is an ideologization of the war. There is a politicization of the war through its narrative, through its interpretation. This is an epistemological problem that I wanted to solve. This means that there are some classical theory of international relations. Both of them we know very well, the realism and liberalism. But they don't take into consideration the linguistic problem, the rhetorical turn in social sciences. That's to say, the analysis of international relation, of international reality, is always a construction of the reality in itself. That is, when someone is talking, is interpreting an international problem, there is a construction. There is an epistemic violence in a way to this construction. This is very difficult to establish the truth of the reality. There is a tension between the reality in itself and the truth in itself. How can we say a narrative tell us the reality of the world? That's the reason why I think that it was important. And the global South perspective is a narrative on the war. So I am going to analyze the narrative, the Western, Russian, Chinese narrative on the war from the global South perspective. What does that mean, global South perspective? It has the global South perspective, the idea of global South has 5 interconnected aspects: historical, economic, geographic, political, and epistemic. Historical, it is related to colonialism, to domination, to the Western countries. When we speak of the global South, we are referring to the countries who have been dominated by the European at the dawn of the modernity. We are going to talk from the domination, from colonialism. And the economic aspect of the global South refers to the developing countries, such as Latin America, Haiti, Latin America, some parts of Africa, some countries of Africa and Asia. Developing countries at the geographic level, they are situated, as I've told, in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. At the political level, they manifest themselves through the resistance to the Western domination, to the European domination. For example, the first conference we had was the Bandung Conference in 1955, when some countries of Africa, Latin America, and Asia have organized a conference in order to affirm their geopolitical identity. In the years of 1960s, they organized what we call the non-alignment movement. They would like to differentiate themselves from the competition between the West and Soviet Union, the political manifestation of them. But the most important, the element that I will take into consideration, this is the epistemic level. The epistemic level means that we should elaborate, construct new categories, new concepts to analyze the world. The epistemic level of the global South refers to post-colonialism, to decolonial turn. That's to say, the idea is to take into consideration the notion of empire, of ways of domination, of imperialism in the analysis of any reality. So, because precisely in this field of international relations, as we know, international relations is the creation of the Western countries, European countries, and also the theory of international relations were constructed by the European countries. And I think that with the global South perspective, we can widen, enlarge the theory of international relations by using some concepts of categories. For example, when the realist theories talk about international relations, they don't put emphasis on ways, on domination, on colonialism. That's the reason why the global South perspective allowed me to complete, not to reject international relations theories, because they are important. They allow us to better understand some reality. Yes, I finished with this consideration. I'm going to make 5 considerations. We have these walls. This wall makes us observe 4 realities. 4 realities. The first reality is the competition between great powers. This is the first reality that this wall allows us to consider. The second is the problem of nuclear capacity. I will develop a better in the discussion with you. The third problem is the return of ideology, democracy, autocracy. There is the return of ideology because the West considers itself as the triumph of democracy, and there is the autocracy of the countries, for example, China, Russia, and we are in the context of ideological struggle. contrary to the perspective of Francis Fukuyama, who spoke of the end of history, the end of ideology, and also contrary to the perspective of Samuel Huntington, who talk about the clash of civilization as a new dynamics of global politics. But we see that there is a return of ideology. And the last observation is that we observe a crisis of international order. We are going to discuss it. Let's begin with the Russian narrative. I think that to better understand the Russian narrative, I will put emphasis on 4 elements. Doctrine of multipolarity in Russia, because starting from 1996, the Russian will have an important doctrine of multipolarity in order to resist the unipolarity. The second is the relation between the Russia, international law, and the West. The third is the relation between identity crisis in Russia and the West. And the third, the Russia and the global South. As you know, the main narrative of Russia is the fact that the war has been launched for security concern. Russia says that there is an enactment of NATO. This is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that was born in 1949 by the European and Western countries in order to contain the Soviet expansion. And Russia thinks that the possible integration of Ukraine into Russia represent a threat, into NATO represent a threat for Russian security. And more largely, we should understand this narrative in relation to the Russian foreign policy. And the key idea of Russian foreign policy is the multipolarity. This doctrine was formulated in 1996 by the Russian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Primakov. Primakov was a Foreign Minister of Russia from 1996 to 1998. And it was Prime Minister of Russia from 1998 and 1999. It was him who elaborated the doctrine of multipolarity of Russia. In the sense that before that time, Russia tried to establish cooperation with NATO, with the alliance. But when the war in Serbia burst, Primakov said, we have no reason to accept the collaboration with the West, with NATO. We have to elaborate to have a doctrine, a vision of multipolarity of the world. It is him who is going to elaborate this. And this doctrine of multipolarity has 3 elements. The first element is, he said that Russia should strive toward a multipolar world managed by a concert of major powers. It was a criticism of unipolarity. As you know, after the collapse of Soviet Union, many scholars speak of unipolarity. And the French Foreign Minister, Hubert Védrine, spoke of hyperpower when it was questioned to the United States. The second element, he said that Russia should insist on its primacy in the post-Soviet space. In the post-Soviet space, the second element of the doctrine is the fact that Russia should have the primacy in its area, in its sphere of influence. It is important for Russia to integrate the ex-Soviet Republic in order that it lead this integration. he recommends, he would like to give to his country, to Russia, a regional role in the post-Soviet space. The third element of this doctrine, Russia should oppose the NATO expansion. The expansion of NATO to Eurasia must be rejected by Russia. I think that this is the structural doctrine of foreign policy of Russia. This is the key ideas. And so, as you know, if I would like to speak a little bit about NATO, after the collapse of Soviet Union, as I've just told you, NATO is a military alliance. It was created in 1949 to contain the Soviet domination of the Western countries, the European countries. NATO had a strategic concept. It was precisely to ensure the collective security of the European countries under the American leadership. That's the reason why in 1955, the Soviet Union created what we call Warsaw Pact, which integrated the country that was under its domination. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, it was many people think that NATO had no reason to survive. Meanwhile, NATO keeps surviving and had new strategic concept. For example, in 1999, NATO welcomes new members such as Hungary, Poland, and Czech Republic. In 2008, NATO had new members, Albania, Croatia, and many others. So this is the doctrine of multipolarity. The relation between NATO, between Russia and the West, it was a tension, it's a confrontation between the West and Russia, because since this doctrine of multipolarity, the tension is growing between both entities. But also, I think that Russia had a civilizational crisis, an identity crisis. This is fundamental. Even if Samuel Huntington in his book, The Clash of Civilization, mentioned it. Kissinger mentioned it. Russia is in two houses, in Asia and in the West. It doesn't feel comfortable in any house. I would remember rapidly that Russia began to imitate the West at the end of the 17th century. The Peter the Great initiated this change, this cultural change. That's the reason why in the 19th century there was an identity crisis between Russia and between the pan-slavism in Russia and the pro-occidentalism in Russia. And after the communist revolution in 1917, what defined Russia was not neither Western tradition or Slavic tradition. It was the communism. But at the end of the communism, there was an identity crisis in Russia. And they said, who defines what is the identity of Russia? Is it a Western country or a Eurasian country or an Asian country? This is an ontological crisis. Which crisis China doesn't have. This is the good difference. That's the reason why Russia in the West is not considered as a normal country. There is also an identity crisis in the relation between Russia and the West. I think it was important to mention that. In Russia and the global South, I think that this is where we have to critique Russia. It is a systematic violation of international law. What Russia sees is a form of imperialism. Russia imitates the Western imperialism in the 19th century, the 17th century. That's the reason why the behavior, the Russian behavior toward Ukraine is an imperialist behavior. Macron said it during the UN Assembly. It is clear. That's why I think that the global South must not fall in the trap, in the Russian trap. This is a, you cannot deny the existence of a state. You cannot deny the history of a state. That's the reason why I think that the Russian perspective toward Ukraine repeats the same European imperialism toward the global South at the beginning of the modernity. That's the reason why in many interventions of the Russian authorities, they say that the West is an empire of lies. But this doesn't imply the violation of international law. This doesn't imply you don't recognize the existence of a state, of an independent state. If Russia has problems with the West, Ukraine is not responsible. It is an independent state, the sovereign state. There is international law. Later, I will develop this aspect. It's important. You cannot say that Ukraine, by a project to be part of NATO, put into question your security. And security, it is a sovereign state. According to that reason why the most important of the all is important in the UN Charter, there is the second article, which talks about the principles of international law. This is the principle of equal sovereignty of every state. The state is free to do whatever he wants if you respect international law. Even if Ukraine wants to be member of NATO, it doesn't violate any, it doesn't put into question the Russian national security. This is where I think it is very important to criticize this perspective. I'm going to talk to the Western perspective. The Western perspective is based on international law. It is clear that there is a violation of international law. I totally share the perspective of Western on the international law, because according to the international law, a state cannot invade other state. There are two reasons that we can have war according to the international law, to the UN Charter. The first is the Article 51. It calls about the self-defense. If Ukraine attacked Russia would have the right to react. For Ukraine, there is no idea of self-defense. And the second legal basis of the war is the Article of 42. The Security Council can undertake collective action against any state who put into question the international security and peace. But there is that. You see that there is the paralysis of the Security Council. There is a systemic problem in the international system. Since President Biden, Joe Biden said it, a member of the Security Council invaded another a sovereign state. It is clearly a violation of international law. And the paradox in this situation is that the international law, from the global perspective, was an instrument of European domination. The international law is related to the Western values, the Western interests. From the beginning of the modernity, the international law was applied to the European countries, not to the colonial countries. This is important to know. There is a relation between international law, race, colonialism, and imperialism. When the West criticizes Russia, it has reason to criticize Russia. But the West has also violated its own principles. Because when one of the fundamental notions of international relation from the beginning was the notion of sovereignty, the idea that a state is free, is independent to organize its territory. But between the European countries, there was sovereignty. But beyond the European borders, there was no sovereignty. In the Caribbean, in Africa, for example, in the 19th century, the European countries began the colonization of Africa, of Asia. It's important. The law the international law has double stage. It's important. That is, the global south perspective allows me not only to recognize the Western narrative against Russia, but to say also that the Western narrative is not it was a narrative that has geopolitical concern. For example, in the 19th century, China was victim of the Western domination. That is the reason why when I am going to take the idea of China, China has the memory of humiliation, of domination of the Western countries, European countries in the 19th century. There is the memory of Japan that dominated China. I will pass on this. To understand that, the reason why China has always this memory of colonialism, domination. China often says that it is a developing country. In his speech of the UN Assembly, September, the foreign minister of China said that we are part of the developing countries of the global south, but we should be very careful about this. And the story of China is the story of the Western domination and Japanese domination. That is why so far there are not good relations between China and Japan. Because for example, in 1932, when Japan intervened in Manchuria, Chinese territory, Chinese called for the League of Nations, there was no solution. Japan was the first Asian country who modernized its economy, its army, in order to compete with the West. That's why Japan wanted to have an imperial war in Asia. We'll develop it a little bit later. So there are a lot of things to do, but let me continue with the argumentation. And there is for the Western, after the geopolitics, the international, the condemnation of the war on legal perspective, there is also the geopolitical concern. Europe has a geopolitical concern regarding peace, security in Europe. This is an important question. Europe was always incapable of organizing its own security. That's why they created NATO in 1949. They invited the United States to take part in it. The United States did not take the initiative to create NATO. It was the European countries that invited the United States to take care of their security. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO didn't disappear because the Europe was not able to ensure its own security. The European security depends on the US power. That's the reason why there are some tension between European Union and US. And some countries want to get their own to work to organize to ensure their own security like France. But this is the problematic. The European had this reaction against the war. It was normal, but it's because they are incapable of ensuring their own collective security. And they want also to critique Russia because they want to maintain the liberal international order. It is the liberal order, democracy, human rights, market economy is the construction of the Western countries, the European countries. And China, Russia did not construct this international order. That's why Robert Gilpin in his famous book, War and Politics and War and World Politics, say that a country that is not satisfied with the current order can reject this order, can undertake action in order to reject this order. The current order was constructed first by the United States. You know very well the 14 points of President Wilson after the First World War. And after the Second World War, the international order was shaped by the United States of America. And after the after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was not a conferences meeting to organize the international order. The international order was shaped systematically, or has been shaped systematically by the United States. That's the reason why when some country like Russia, China, and other countries would like to question the international order, it's because this order, according to them, is not favorable to them. This is the crisis of the order. To finish the section, the multilateral section, you see that it is important. You can ask a methodological questions. On what basis the European countries, the Western countries, section Russia? You can ask, what are the legal provisions of international section? There are two kinds of section, two methods to section a country. You can section it unilaterally. You have relation with the country, you decide to break your diplomatic relation with him. You can section the country through international organization. But the problem is that the Western countries section Russia not through multilateral procedures, but from a unilateral perspective. The methods to section Russia was a little bit hegemonic. Why don't you use the United Nations system? Why don't you use the international law to section Russia? This is a methodological, a geopolitical problem. That's the reason why those countries, such as Russia and China, if the section, Western section Russia, it's because they dominate the current international order. That is why I think that the global south, those countries from India, Africa, Latin America, some of them don't follow the West. They don't follow the West, not because they accept, they agree, they accept with Russia, the Russian intervention, but they disagree with the West for the way in which the West decide to section. They section and they want other people, other countries to follow them. This is an imperial style of section. This is I don't know if you understand me. This is the problem. You can section. There is the crisis of multilateralism, because the international society has two elements. When you study international problems, there are two elements to consider. There is the rules, the institutions, and the actors. The institutions exists to structure the international system. There are rules, there are norms. You can ask yourself, wonder if the Western strategy to section Russia is conform to international law, to international multilateralism. We can discuss it later. Let's pass to the Chinese perspective. I think that the diplomacy of China is what I call a diplomacy of geopolitical equilibrium, balance diplomacy. China knows that it has good economic relation with the West. It doesn't want to have problem, to have economic problem. But China also criticized the West. In this, the narrative of China on this war is the fact that NATO is responsible. They think that the territorial expansion of NATO is responsible. That's why in his address to the General Assembly, the Chinese foreign minister said that he said, I have the phrase, he said that the peaceful solution of the crisis requires that we take into consideration the security concern of all parties. They have to protect the developing countries. Of China, think that we have to take into consideration the security concern of Russia and Ukraine. But China also, in his address, the foreign minister spoke about a multipolar world. We want to have a multipolar world. That is not only a one power, a multipolar world. Even during the summit, the Shanghai summit on cooperation, Putin and Xi Jinping said that they want to have a multipolar world. I think that the position of China is not only it doesn't criticize, China doesn't criticize openly the war, but I think that it must have a multipolar world. We have to take into consideration the security concern of each part, but China also has, it is important with the West. There is a problem with the West. This is the historical domination of China by the West. In the 19th century, this is what there is something that we know. This is the unequal treaties. China was obliged to sign some treaties, was obliged to open its borders to Western trade. And during the beginning of the 20th century, China was invaded by Japan. The German China was part of the communist, has been part of the communist vision. But it is China doesn't criticize openly the war, but recognize the complexity of the situation. That's why I think that we must take into consideration the concern of Ukraine and the concern of Russia. I will develop more this in the debate. I would like to pass to my final, which is the idea of the apolarity. I think that, to my perspective, the idea of apolarity, this war allows us to have a new vision of the world order. This is the idea of apolarity. I think that the notion of pole is related to the power distribution in the national society. Generally, when we speak of an international order, we speak of some rules, some principles, some institutions that organize the international system. So far, for example, Henry Kissinger, in an important book that he published in 2015, World Order, he said that a world order is a product of a region. A world order is always particular, singular. The current world order we have is a Western world order. The Chinese, the Russian, in order would like to have a new world order that reflects the interest, the values, the security. I think that the idea of apolarity, to argument, for what reason I'm speaking of apolarity? So far, we had witnessed 3 modes of international order. The unipolar, where one power dominates the landscape, the global politics. And this is what we had after the collapse of Soviet Union in the United States. And the idea of bipolarity is when we have 2 powers, 2 good powers, like during the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States were the great powers that dominated the international politics. And the multipolarity, this is we had in the 19th century. This is the traditional style of European diplomacy. The formation of alliances, the secret formation of alliances, the multipolarity. It was the President Wilson who put into question the idea of balance of power in the international relation. He created the notion of public diplomacy, the question of League of Nations. It was the United States has made a radical shift in the national politics. Mm-hmm. And Kissinger said it clearly in his famous book, Diplomacy. This book, I think that it is clear that the United States has shaped international world order, has shaped international system. the World War I, the World War II, and after the end of the Cold War. But I think that and after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we had the idea of unipolarity. But and also in the United States security, national security, St. Donald Trump in 2007, it is said that Russia and China are systemic challenges to American power. There is a recognition of the multipolarity in the United States foreign policy. Donald Trump said it in the document of national security. It has been repeated in the Joe Biden document of national security, though there is a recognition of the multipolarity. But in my perspective, the idea of apolarity means that we won't have any poles. Because the idea of the pole refers to the construction of military formation, of political formation. And also, when we speak of multipolarity, there is a problem. We often refer to Russia, China, and the United States. What do you do with the other countries? The global south, with some other countries, with Europe. I think that the notion of apolarity means that we are heading toward a post-Western world order, a postmodern, we can say postmodern world order, because of many things. The first reason why I speak of the apolarity is to the end of the Western universalism. The end of the Western hegemony. The West will be part of any international order, but they will recognize that there are a variety of values of institution, including, for example, during his speech in the General Assembly, President Joe Biden mentioned that we should change the Security Council. We must have new members inside the Security Council. This means that we have to change the current international order, because the current international order was run by the European and Western countries. That's the reason why China, Russia, and other countries want to reshape this order. There is the end of the Western universalism, and also the systemic position of the South, the global South. When those developing countries, this is my perception, my narrative. I should recognize this is my analysis of the war, of the situation. I think that they don't want to belong neither to Russia or China or to the West. They want to have a new world order. Even if China said that it is part of the global South, the developing countries. I think the idea of there is a return to the traditional values we have. For example, in China, it is the return of Confucianism, of Asian values. Even if there is a problem with Asia, Kissinger said it clearly in his book World Order. He said that there is not an Asian consciousness as there is a European consciousness. There is a European Union, but we cannot have an Asian integration because there are some historical contention, some historical tensions in Asia. We have civilization in Asia, but we're gonna have a European. We have a European Union in Europe, but you're gonna have an Asian Union. Even if there was the Shanghai Summit, where we saw India, China, Pakistan, but everyone has some problems, some tension, some political and geopolitical tension. You cannot have. That's the reason why the world order, I think, it cannot be bipolar, multipolar, must be apolar, in the sense that this is a new order that should be more democratic, more inclusive, more open. And I use a term that I call the creolization of the national order. This is a term that is used in the Caribbean tradition, the Creole language, as you speak Creole, you tell me about Creole. The Creole is the language of many countries in the Caribbean. The Creole, it has no center. It is some words in Haiti, for example, some words of Creole, 80% of the words of Creole come from French. The grammar of Creole come from Africa. The word come from Portuguese. And so the Creole has no center. It is the creolization of the world order in the sense that there will be a plurality, a diversity of values, of norms, of institutions. I think that we will not witness the end of the Western values, but the Western values will take into consideration other values. And Kissinger said it in his book. It is, I don't know if you have read this book. It's very interesting book, World Order. Very interesting book where we need to have a new world order. But I think that to finish, the war in Ukraine allows me to take into consideration that it is a war between great power competition between the West and Russia. And this means that it is limited to them, but the global South has a perspective. It doesn't take position because it wants to have a new international system. The global South position is not anti-Western, it's not pro-Russian. I interpret it as a wish to get a new international order based on plurality, on diversity, based on, in the Caribbean, we speak of diversality. Diverse, universality, we speak of diversality. Or we speak not of universality, we speak of pluriversality. And a pluriversal international order. You know the concept? Plurality, not a universal international order, but a pluriversal international order. This means that a world order where we'll have new actors, new values, new institutions. This is important. And well, I finished.
You can take a few more minutes if you want to. Yeah.
Thank you. Let me regarding the notion of creolization. It is fundamental. I would like to develop that because I have written 5 books on the creolization. And then this notion means that the world order is on the way. It is open, and I think that thank you so much for telling me this. I will show you the last number of Foreign Affairs. He said the age of uncertainty. This is very nice publication. By way of speaking of uncertainty, I speak of apolarity. I think that the journal recognize there is an uncertainty. The apolarity, I think, to my mind, is better fit because you speak of international relation. The uncertainty we might us to philosophy, to social psychology. But if we want to use a word, an international, a word that has relation with international relation, we should speak the age of apolarity. The uncertainty is the age of uncertainty is good. I will compare it is good because what is described is the fact that there is a dangerous decade. But I think that they were very clear. But I think that the term apolarity allows me to better define the current international order. And I began to reflection about the apolarity since the war in Syria, when the war occurred in Syria, when Obama said that there was a red line that anybody should cross, and Syria not only crossed the red line, it was supported by Russia. And I think that we have a good power cannot have double language. if it cannot punish the fact that the other crossed the red line, there is a problem. There is an uncertainty. And that's why I think that the world order is heading toward a complex, an apolar world. The global south, from colonialism, West domination, criticize at the same time, the West and Russia. There is a criticism. Those countries criticize Russia and the West. The neutrality doesn't mean that they accept the Russian invasion of Russia. It would be contrary to the historical memory. Historically, they were dominated by the European countries. You cannot accept such a violation of the territorial integrity of a country. But it is the way how, for example, the West reacted to the war. The West wanted the global south to follow. The global south doesn't follow, not because they accept the war, but because they critique the imperial style of section. This is what I think, that there is a systemic, an earthquake in the international world order. There is a systemic change in this international. It is systemic, is the fact that we are going to experience a new architecture of the international order, and the global south, I think, wants to reshape, wishes to reshape this international. Yeah, I can say that is very important to finish. Is the fact that China, as you know, historically is a peaceful country from the modern age. Mm-hmm. And China has been always part of the third world. During the Cold War, China imitated Soviet Union. When China saw that it was not good, when Japan imitated the West, Japan has made an economic growth and development. China decided to imitate the West because the communist example was not good. But and to finish, I think that it is clear that not only it is a good power competition, this war, but also it is we are going toward a new structure of the international system. This an apolar world with the position of the global south. I think, even if my English is not so good, I hope that you have understood the core ideas, the core arguments of my conversation. Thank you so much. If you have it.
So what we'll do now is I have prepared some questions to ask you, and I push back on you in some places as well. And then we'll open it up to student questions. I had several students submit questions. I've written some names down of questions I think would be helpful. Then, of course, now you've all heard the lecture. If you have a burning question, or perhaps a question related to the conversation that's already going on, feel free to raise your hand and we can sort of be a little more informal, a little more allowance for interruption, to sort of have more of a kind of casual conversation. I think we're gonna move this aside and bring a chair over here instead. Is that all right?
Yes, better. Thank you.
Brought this for you, by the way, this bottle of water. I don't know if you want to keep this.
I'll thank you.
Yeah. And let's move your chair over here, actually. Sure. Oh, there we go. Here. Okay. All right. So my first question, I wanted to start by reading the transcript of the Kenyan ambassador's address to the United Nations the day after Russia decided to recognize Luhansk and Donetsk and begin its operation. He said, "Today, across the border of every single African country live our countrymen with whom we share deep historical, cultural, and linguistic bonds. At independence, we had chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic. No, I'm sorry. At independence, had we chosen to pursue states on the basis of ethnic, racial, or religious homogeneity, we would still be waging bloody wars these many decades later. Instead, we agreed that we would settle for the borders that we inherited, but we would still pursue continental political, economic, and legal integration. Rather than form nations that looked ever backwards into history with a dangerous nostalgia, we chose to look forward to a greatness none of our many nations and peoples had ever known. We chose to follow the rules of the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Charter, not because our borders satisfied us, but because we wanted something greater, something forged in peace. One more section here. We believe that all states formed from empires that have collapsed or retreated have many peoples in them yearning for integration with peoples in neighboring states. This is normal and understandable. After all, who does not want to be joined to their brethren and to make common purpose with them? However, Kenya rejects such a yearning from being pursued by force. We must complete our recovery from the embers of dead empires in a way that does not plunge us back into new forms of domination and oppression. Okay, so I wanted to start with that because I think that that's kind of, to me, was the most striking global South perspective that I encountered immediately following this invasion, that there is this acceptance of the rules-based order that is, as you pointed out, was sort of designed by Western powers, and I would argue opted into by China and Russia at that foundation, right? They weren't necessarily a part of constructing it, but they opted into it, and their membership on the Security Council was there from the beginning in order to ensure that there was sort of a place for argumentation, right? I worry that in some of the ways that I worry that we're at risk in this form of this moment in history, not of progressing into a new order, but regressing into a time when imperialism based on either near or far claims of history are used to sort of shatter the order we have. And that an apolar order, as interesting as that is, and as much as I see the appeal of a sort of decentralized system, I wonder, what do you see as who makes it happen, right? Is there a set of actors that actually asserts or sort of forms this order? How do you see this process playing out beyond this crisis? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for this question. The first, I think that the Kenyan minister was right, because one of the principles of the post-colonial states, if I remember well, it was uti possidetis juris. You should, it is a Latin expression, I don't know if I remember it well, you should maintain the same border after the end of colonization. It's clear. I think that it is an imperialist action of Russia. There is no doubt in this, because international law, the second article, the United Nations, there are two main articles. The first article of the chapter and the second. The first article emphasizes the goals, law, development, human rights. The second article is about the principles, the sovereignty, the equal sovereignty of state, the non-interference in the state affairs, and I think that the respect of the territorial integrity, it is clear. What has done Russia is much more than the violation of international law. It is a regression to the imperialism. It is clear. That's the reason why many countries of Africa or the continent denounce this annexion, this violent imperial annexion. It is clear, and I think that is the reason why the global South, some developing countries, must not fall in the Russian trap. It is, you want to challenge the West for your own interests,
or your historical nostalgia, or historical imperialism nostalgia of your of the empire. That is why I think that Kenya said that in order to remind, to make us see that it is an imperial, it is a radical shift in the national order. I think that regarding the world order, who shapes will make happen this new world order. It is very important. It is a theoretical, a conceptual question, because we can say that, for example, for the realist theory, there is an important internationalist, David Muscaret, I think. Someone has published a book, Orders of Exclusion. Every order is created by exclusion, by relation of power. There is the constructivist theory that says that an order is created by consensus, by negotiation between actors. I think that the creation of the future of this world order depends on the participation of the global south, of all actors. For the global south, we should pluralize the international world order. That's why I am speaking about the pluriversality. This is not by force. For example, there was the universalization. The international liberal order was universalized after the collapse of the Soviet Union. There were, I can say, there were two world orders: the Soviet communist world order, international order. There was the liberal international order during the Cold War. After the end of the Cold War, we see the globalization, the universalization of the international liberal world order. Right now, it is in crisis. I think that this is the actors, the agency, all actors of global south, from the West and from other countries, that should shape this new world order. It is undetermined. That is the reason why a foreign policy talks about the uncertainty.
You have a question? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So just as a follow-up to actually your question, and perhaps to kind of try to find out that perhaps is the question we should be asking whether we do want a waning US power, I mean internationally or in the world. And I think this was a question that was asked in 2007. I read a very interesting article by, I think his name was Fareed Zakaria. He published it in Foreign Policy. And he said something very interesting. And he was mentioning the British historian Niall Ferguson. He said that according to Ferguson, he actually speculated that the end of the American hegemony might not fuel an orderly shift to a multipolar system, just as you argued, but a descent into a world of highly fragmented powers, and which is in line with this argument, of course. And then he says, with no one exercising any global leadership. And then, of course, then he said he called this apolarity, which is what you have exceptionally and very well taught us today. And then he said apolarity could turn out to mean an anarchic new dark age, as you were saying. And then he says that Ferguson said this would be an era of course, a waning, waning empires and religious fanaticism, of economic plunder and pillage in the world, forgotten regions, of economic stagnation, and civilizations retreat into a few fortified enclaves. And then that this might be, at that time, he was calling it far-fetched. But then he did say, but for those who have been fondly waiting for the waning of the American dominance, be careful what you wish for, because we might be going backwards into the dark age. Is that what we really want?
May I add one thing to that? You could add a question to this that would just be, aren't we back at the same collective action problem that the system we built so far was aiming to solve, right? And how do global South countries solve that collective action problem? that all right? Yeah.
Yes.
You have mentioned what you say is very clear, is correct. I think that we don't go back to that age, to the pre-modern perspective. This is also a vision of some pessimistic persons about the shift of the current international order. As you know, since 5 centuries, the world order has been shaped by the European countries. There was not only the world order, the social sciences and the humanities. There was a political, economic, and epistemic violence, a conceptual violence in the construction of the world. Even if the notion of state, the notion of nation, of human right, of democracy, come from the European traditions. And it was limited to them. And after it was imposed to other countries without taking into consideration their particularity, their singularity. But I think that the way how we should avoid going back to this dark age is to use, I can say, the constructivist perspective. That's to say, the relevance of agency of the global south, of the West. It is not an order that will exclude the West. We should not exclude anyone. I think that it is important to have a better, dynamic, inclusive, democratic world order. When, for example, President Joe Biden says he wants to think that we must enlarge the Security Council, I think this is the idea of having a better democratic world order, international order. So I don't think that we should go back. It is a question of going back to that age. We have to take into consideration the dynamics of the world. That's the reason why the notion of prioritization means that there is an uncertainty, undetermination. There's an openness of the reality. How to conceptualize this new reality? You see that in my conceptualization, not only I take into account the traditional theory of international relations, but I try to open it to post-colonial, decolonial, the notion of when we speak of the failed state, the notion of state is a European political and conceptual reality. It was the religious crisis in Europe that gave rise to the notion of state, notion of territory, notion of sovereignty. It was not only applied to the non-European countries, but the European countries didn't want them to get sovereignty, to get the full development. It is a very complicated issue. That's why I think that the constructivism, the theory of constructivism is very important because it emphasizes the notion of agency, of consensus, of collaboration, of participation, of inclusion. We should, that's the reason why I criticize a little bit the realist theory that only emphasize the relation of power, the idea of balance of power. Hans Borgento, you know him very well. It is important to enlarge international relation theory to new problems, new perspective.
I have a follow-up perspective on this, and that is the order we have. Oh, let me back up a second. So one part of the Russian narrative of this is, and I'm not sure you mentioned this in your lecture, that basically the US and the West are hypocrites. And like that's like everything about this war has a precedent somewhere else. The US unilaterally invaded Iraq to overthrow a dictator, right? The recognition across the West of Kosovo, even though there's a human rights justification for that, was against the rules that are in place, right? And repeatedly, Vladimir Putin and Minister Lavrov have pointed out, all of these rules are broken all the time by the West. This is what he says. If they work in their favor, they accept them. If they work against them, they throw them out the window. So I think that that's right? But I also think that to build a system and make ideal statements of ideals that the system should be reaching to reaching towards still is tremendously productive, right? It was this order in place that the US pointed to European powers and said, this is why colonialism is not possible anymore, because this is how we want the world to run, right? This gave tools to form up, there were legal tools that were provided to formerly oppressed people to say, look, we are justified in throwing you out, right? We have this principle of territorial integrity and self-determination, and the legitimacy of that system completely collapsed under its own weight at that point, right? So I think that that's a really positive track record here, and I wonder why we can't say, hey, these ideals, for one, help us recognize what's so wrong with this invasion of Ukraine. But for two, actually, those tools are still very much available for global South governments to say, we will assert our agency in this place, right? And to seize upon Joe Biden's statement that the UN Security Council needs reform and say, yeah, sign me up, right? There are powers like, you know, I don't want to make any rivals or enemies in here, but to name a few, Brazil, Nigeria, very populous, economically powerful countries in every continent that would be a very good candidate to join without really undoing anything about the order, just sort of expanding the franchise, so to speak, within the system we have, right? So I struggle to see why that is not sort of kind of the best case scenario in the moment we're in right now.
I think I'm totally agree with you, because we should give more, I think, more voice, more the global South, the UN system, because when it was shaped, it was dominated by the European and Western values, and right now that's the reason why Kissinger speaks about the legitimacy of the world order. Legitimacy is related to the acceptation by others. And when the global South position means that we should change the national system, the national order, make it more democratic. It doesn't support Russia. Okay, any country can support such an invasion. It's a radical violation of international law, of the integrity of a country. But as you mentioned it, Western countries didn't respect the values, the principles. There was a problem of legitimacy, a problem of validity. I think this is where we should think.
Sure, go ahead.
Just in addition to that, if I were to go with that argument that was just made, would it therefore be ideal, to have a Security Council where there are no permanent members within the definition of polarity?
Very nice question, but historically it is a little bit problematic, because when the League of Nations was formed in the 1920s, there was no Security Council, and the leader system could not avoid wars, avoid aggression. That is why the creation of the Security Council is a realistic decision, taking into consideration the current power relation between states. That is why the United Nations has two dynamics. There is a democratic dynamics in the General Assembly. There is an anti-democratic dynamic in the Security Council, because some members have enjoyed some right of veto. This is a double, as Dubois speaks of double consciousness. This is a double reality inside the United Nations, because it is problematic. And also the idea of democracy, for example, but I don't have time to speak about that, because I teach also political philosophy. This requires important analysis. When you speak of democracy, for example, there is an international law of peace. There is an international law of human rights. There is an international law of development, but there is not an international law of democracy. It's important. And international law recognizes that each state has the right to choose its political system. This is problematic. Even if in the practice, there is the acceptation of democratic legitimacy. But when I speak of democracy, I am referring to the ideology, not to the international law, because there is not an international law of democracy. This is problematic. We can try to analyze that. Even if democracy, it is clear, for me, is the best system, the best political system. And during the Cold War, for example, the communists claim to be democratic, and the Western claim also to be democratic. Look, the democracy is an ideological problem. It is an ideological struggle. So how we can solve this ideological problem? That is why, even if, for example, the idea of democracy is very recent in the modern history. It is after the Second World War that we are going to speak of democracy as even if after the Second World War, after the collapse of the Cold War, but the 19th century, the current developed countries were not democratic. The European countries were not democratic during many centuries. In the 15th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, they were not democratic. It was the monarchy. Even if there was a change regarding the parliament, regarding the rule of law, but they were not democratic. So it is important to take into account. That is why the post-colonial perspective, the colonial perspective, some ideas, makes us see that it is complicated to say that we should be democratic. Meanwhile, we don't have the condition to be it, because the Western countries, before being democratic, they were developed throughout the Industrial Revolution. So Europe it passes through many transformations. It was a political, philosophical transformation with the Renaissance, with the Enlightenment. It was after there was an economic transformation with the Industrial Revolution. After there was a social revolution in the 19th century with the social rights. And after we have the welfare state. To have a welfare state, we should have first richness, development. Or some developing country cannot have welfare state because we don't have the money, the development. This is very complicated. And I think that this is a complex issue that we should analyze in order to see where is the problem.
I'll just point out that I often will say in class that the full name of France's official name on paper is the Fifth Republic of France. They did this 5 times to get to where they are, right? It's democratization. That's not what this talk is on today, but it's a very chaotic process to go from an authoritarian system to democracy. And there's many steps, and it is a totally different route for every country. So it's very hard to force it from the top down. I very much agree with you that there's not a lot of successes that we can see with that. For an earlier point too, I think since you've been referencing Kissinger so much, for your point on the Security Council and how membership might work, I think he would say, and as other realists would be to say that what the Security Council effectively does is takes issues that major powers would have used military force to adjudicate between themselves and gives them a stage to argue with words and laws rather than with force, right? And in effect, the veto is therefore a good thing because it's providing a platform for that. That is what I would take the realist perspective to be on that. And I think there's definitely some truth there to consider, but you could still reform, you could still make it so you need two states to veto with a slightly larger membership and every continent represented. There's reforms that are possible without changing it too much. All right, I have one other question, and then we're going to go to student questions. And this one's much smaller. You said Russia has a identity crisis,
Yes.
right? I would respond by saying, conversely, Eastern European states do not have an identity crisis, right? Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were very quick to apply for NATO membership, especially, for example, the Baltic states, because they said, we know that it's only a matter of time before the Russian bear is strong again, and we do not want to be dominated that way again. So this is our ticket to that kind of security, right? We have a clearly identified sort of identity as a nation, whether it's Lithuanian or Latvian or Estonian or Hungarian, right? There's so many. And there is no more identity crisis because the Soviet Union is gone and nationalism is back. And this is how we perceived ourselves all along, right? So I think that part of the sort of recipe for tension we see is a bunch of smaller states that were dominated for a long time, very much emerged from the collapse with a clear sense of identity, right? And then you have the Russian state dealing with the fallout, and now is in a moment where it says, what happened to everything we used to have and the influence we used to have? What do you think about that?
I think so. It's clear. In the case of Russia, they want to, from the 17th century, with the reforms of Peter the Great. Before 17th century, Russia looked at the East, at Asia. After making a trip to the European countries, they went back, said that we have to change our customs, our clothes, the army. There was a radical change in Russia. It is from the 17th and then 17th century that Russia began to look at the West and took part in the balance of power in the 19th century. And this there we and so far and since there is two tendencies: the Western trend and the Slav tendency. And so that is why, for example, Samuel Huntington in his book, The Clash of Civilization, he says that the European Union have has the European countries have done the Renaissance, Enlightenment, Reformation, but we didn't have this in Russia. It was in the Middle East, in the Middle Age. It is under the imitation of the Western countries that Russia began to change its tradition. And right now, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia is not so far defined by communists, by the communist ideology, but there was a crisis of identity. The crisis, Russia want to belong to the West or to the East. This is I think that this is a civilizational crisis in terms of values, of democracy, of autocracy. That's the reason why the West doesn't consider, for example, when the Russians speak, we can say to which a civilization they belong, to the West or to Asia. This is a crisis of identity. It is important to understand the foreign policy of a country, because the foreign policy of a country take into consideration its history, its identity, its values. It's important. I think that this is a very important issue, the idea of identity of a state, like to say it values its tradition. It is relation, in its relation with other countries, it takes into consideration.
All right, so moving to student questions, I selected some that I think are very concrete because we've been talking at a very high level this whole time. So all of you in my class, get ready. I might just randomly call your name. So I want to start with David Babijian's question. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Hi, so.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I don't remember the exact wording of my question, but it was something along the lines of, obviously due to the war in Ukraine, there's shortages. Ukraine is a large exporter of like wheat and seed oils and stuff like that.
Yes.
And due to the war, obviously their total exports are decreasing. So to what extent has this affected the global south?
Yes, clear. It's more. If you came from Haiti, Right now, 2 days ago, the government has increased the price of gas, and there are many manifestations. That's why, for example, the Senegalese went to Russia. Immediately, the president of Senegal went to Russia and spoke to Vladimir Putin to say that this affect them. It is clear. It is, the president of Senegal told him that this affect us in the global south. This is a good crisis. That's the reason why everywhere there is there is inflation, there is this crisis, this energy crisis. I think it is clear that it affects us because it is difficult to get access. In Germany is one of the first countries that is affected by this. It's clear. That's the reason why those developing countries should be very careful because the tension, this war between Russia and Ukraine has to see with the Russian relation with the West. Because the key doctrine, the key idea of Russian doctrine was the multipolarity. The multipolarity means that they want to have multiple poles of powers. They want to maintain the image of Russia in the international relation. They want to preserve a sphere of influence for Russia in its region. It is clear that this affects the global south, as I told you. I think that it is very complicated. That's why the reason why we think that this war must be ended in order to find a way to find a solution. But it is very difficult.
Melissa, Etienne, can you ask your question?
I don't remember where to start, but my question was due to basically the global south, especially Haiti, has been on negative terms with the U.S., especially during the 19th century, due to things that the U.S. might go to Haiti. So, what are some of the perspectives of the citizens of Haiti? Are they more so on the fence that the U.S. should intervene with the Ukraine-Russian situation, or are they just kind of taken aback and just watching over to see what happens? Because are they more so to the point where they feel as though the U.S. should help them since the U.S. didn't help Haiti, or do they feel as though the U.S. should just do what they did to Haiti and just sit back and watch what happens?
The Haitian government has published a communique where it criticized the intervention. It calls for the respect of international law. And I think that I taught a class about the foreign policy of world powers. The developing countries can with difficulty have an independent foreign power. For example, I was the director of international organizations. It was the most important direction. It is the most important of the direction because we always receive some requests of many countries to support them. We always receive if, for example, there will be an election in the Security Council or IMF, World Bank. Those developed countries tell us how to vote. If you don't vote according to their perspective, they will cut the help. Those developed countries doesn't have truly an independent foreign policy. Even if it wants to have, but I can say that Haiti, as mentioned it, Haiti was, I told it with other person, Haiti at the beginning of the 19th century was the first power in the continent. I will tell you why. You are before the Monroe Doctrine, before 1824. Haiti took independence in 1804. Haiti helped the South America to get its independence. Simon Bolivar. Haiti helped Mexico to independence through army, through money, through arms. Haiti helped the Greece to get its independence against the Ottoman Empire. If one day you are going to Greece, to the Greek parliament, you can visit, you can see the letter that the Haitian president, the 19th century, Pétion, wrote to the Greek independentists. It has, but what is a good power? The power is fundamentally the capacity to change the behavior of others according to your will. Before, the Monroe Doctrine, it was the greatest power in the continent because it projected at the international level its capacity to change the situation. You see, this is paradoxal. This is a paradox. It's a paradox. But after but it could not resist. But it is fundamental to remind that even if and also in the 19th century, the idea of global South began with Haiti. The reject of the national order, the colonialism, the slavery, the Haitian revolution, and the idea of post-racist, post-racism in Haiti, because in the Haitian constitution of 1805, it is said that all Haitians are black. They were white. It is a post-racist. The idea of color was not fundamental in the formation of the Haitian nation. But I can add more. Fundamentally, from 1820 to 1860, more than 30 Black Americans came to Haiti. Because, as you know, after the independence, they came to Haiti. Dubois, the most important Black American scholar is Dubois. His fathers come from Haiti, but before, during the Great Migration. The idea of Pan-Africanism, of decolonization, Haiti had made many contributions to the world history. I have a book, my first book was written in Spanish, Haiti Beyond the Mirror, where I analyzed this contribution. But there was an active part. Haiti played an important role in world state in the international society at the 19th century.
Stephen DeLuise, can you ask your question?
Yes, right here.
Yeah.
So with the war in Ukraine, it's forced many European countries to get off the Russian oil, like Nord Stream 2. So how could some of these countries in like South America, such as like Mexico and Colombia, like how would a lot of these European countries actually start to rely on South American oil producers? Is that possible? And what type of effects can they see out of that? Like, how would they international view and even like relations with South American countries change?
Much more with Venezuela. As you know, President of Venezuela has spoken about the increases of the oil production. For production, it is clear that it is to get a balance. I think that is clear that these countries, much more Venezuela, in order to supply, they are producing much more oil in order to face the scarcity of this situation.
Sarah Marie, can you ask your question?
Hi, how are you?
Fine, thank
Thank
you.
you for your time. So my question was regarding, I had two, so.
You can choose.
But how does the lack of leadership, in Haiti influence foreign policies in response to this crisis?
Very good question. As I thought, a foreign policy of a developing country is very problematic. It depends on its relation with good powers. To take a position on the international stage, it depends, for example, to the order you receive from the good powers. It lack of leadership because there is the idea of underdevelopment. That is why I think that China has done well when it wants to develop the economic development. It has first, we want to do first the economic development. After you can speak of politics. I think that Haiti, it's clear it doesn't have cannot have a good leadership. because of the economic underdevelopment. And the international politics is shaped by the good power competition. And this is the reality. Even if international law cannot play an important role. For example, if you read some books, for example, the book Kissinger, Jean Mersheimer, Jonah Kenberry, David Lake, Brzezinski, all of the relevant internationalists, they don't focus their attention on the national law, but rather on power relation, power distribution. This is important. And this power relation influences the foreign policy of developing countries. Even if you have your goodwill to act, but you cannot do it because your economic situation depends on the good power competition.
Zachary, is he still here? Zachary Edwards, did you leave already? Oh, you did. Okay, so we'll go to Mackenzie.
Exporting more than 7 million in medical supplies and other supplies needed in Haiti's food security issues. Where 30% of the population doesn't have access to food. How is that going to affect Haiti's economy in the long term?
It has already affected the Asian economy. But not only it is a good question, but we have a good problem, economic problem. And I have analyzed the situation in the books. A modern state is an industrialized state. You must have further development before having the idea of welfare. You have most industrialization, the development. Haiti has not had any economic development, any bourgeoisie. You didn't have any modernizing elite. There is no political elite, no economic elite. We have some oligarchs, I would say, that dominate the economic system in Haiti. It will affect much more because that is the reason. For example, the Asian countries, some South Korea and other, they did the development with the Western cooperation during the Cold War for geopolitical reasons. Yeah. But they had a national elite. We don't have elite. We don't have bourgeoisie. Because in the modern world, to summarize, there are two ways to make the development, either by state or either by bourgeoisie. But first of all, it was the state that began. In the communist countries, it was the state. It was the state that made the development. The capitalist countries, it is the bourgeoisie. It didn't have neither state nor bourgeoisie. It's a very complicated problem. That's why I am very independent. I am a writer. I criticize. I'm independent. I wrote many books about the situation because we don't have an economic elite, a political elite. A society must be developed by its elite. This is the problem.
We're almost talking about democratization again.
Yeah.
This is a big part of the conversation of people who study democratization. You need a solid middle class elite to sort of have there be some political tension to spread out in other parts of politics. But that's not necessarily helpful to have right now. Nick Kimball, can you ask your question?
So my question, the megacities of the global south have experienced major socioeconomic and environmental problems. How is the Russian-Ukraine situation impacts the global south's development projects and?
Oh, I think it is clear. It is clear that that reason why they react against the aggression, the Russian aggression against Ukraine. This will react in many ways, from the energy crisis, the food crisis. It is clear. I think that there is no doubt that this will affect them. That's why they would like that they will end, but it is not easy. because it will must be ended with a diplomatic conference or have a the agreement. I think that this is by the energy crisis, economic crisis that is on the way, perhaps. You are Haitian or you are, you say merci beaucoup?
Français.
Ah, well, okay. I mean, why you speak as, you have a good accent, I think that means, but okay.
I have one more, Soraya, can you ask your question?
Yes, this is here because the position is clear. Nobody can reject the position of the Western narrative on the war. It is clear. Even in the past, the European, the Western countries had violated international law. Right? It is clear. But I think that this is the paradox. As the Professor Delson said it, the Russian authority repeat that the Western, they say that the Western countries are empire of lies. They have violated their own principles. Right now, China violates international law, but the West also have violated this same international law. This international law. This is this refers us to the very nature of international system. What is the nature of the system? And the main characteristic of it is the anarchy. There is one of the most important international theories. It is Kenneth Walsh, the theory of international politics, said in 1979, said that the national society is characterized by the hierarchy, the national relation, anarchy. There is no central authority. But the international law should be the guide of any foreign policy. The foreign policy must be first, we must respect first international law, because international law is the principles, the rules, the procedures that organize the interaction at the international level. So if the first element we should find in a foreign policy must be the respect of international law. But generally, we don't see that. We see only the realist perspective, the power relation. This is the problem. We have a systemic problem in the international relation because the international society is characterized, is based on the anarchy, on the absence of a global power, global governance, global rules. There is no centralized authority. If a state violates international law, who or which can punish him? This is the problem of the national system. That is why many authors think that we should have a bipolar system. Others think we should have a multipolar system. For example, once again, to the realist perspective, a balance of power, multipolarity. To have peace, we should have multiple of powers. Others think we should have, Robert Gilbert think we should have an hegemonic power. Others think we should have, for example, a bipolar. But in my perspective, it is what I call an hegemonic vacuum. We don't have hegemonic power. It's about the rules, the principles that structure, that shape international system. The war in Ukraine make us witness, acknowledge the fundamental crisis of international system, the absence of authority. There is a good and important German philosopher called Hannah Arendt. He has a book, The Crisis of Culture. The authority is the idea of hierarchy. She studied the authority in the Roman culture tradition. The authority means the respect of the tradition, the authority, the hierarchy. When there is no authority, no hierarchy, we are in a crisis. But to understand the true nature of this crisis, the absence of authority. Who can punish? Punishes Russia. But we didn't mention the idea of nuclear capacity. But I forget to develop it. It is important. Russia, when Russia mentions its nuclear capacity, it is at the same time, a proof of weakness. It is clear, there is no doubt. But it tells you that it has a apocalyptic a capacity to strike. Because we must know there are two moments in the history of military strategy. There's the classical moment until the 1945. Until 1945, the war between states was a war, a terminal war. And you want to win the war at all costs. It was the visit of Clausewitz. The war was aimed. You want to win the war. When there was a war, you have to win it. But with the nuclear energy, anybody can win a war. Because this is the catastrophic, that's the reason why Henry Kissinger published an important book in 1955, Nuclear Weapon and Foreign Policy. To show that we cannot, the nuclear energy, due to the nuclear energy, we cannot make war. We should manage the war. That to say, with the nuclear capacity, the strategy is a no strategy. Generally, a strategy is to make the war. Meanwhile, the nuclear strategy is a strategy not to do the war. To make the war, it is a no strategy. A paradox. This is what they call during the Cold War the deterrent, the nuclear deterrence. You cannot power. For example, Russia is a good nuclear power. But anybody can win a war if there is a nuclear. It's for the reason why Putin speaks like that. There is an abuse of his nuclear capacity, and the nuclear capacity is part of his foreign policy, of his national strategy. This is very complicated with the nuclear. That's the reason why he mentioned a lot of time the use of nuclear, the nuclear capacity. It is a proof of weakness. It is clear because you can use your nuclear capacity at the end. At the end, but we should try how to manage the nuclear capacity. That's the reason why there are two moments in the nuclear management during the Cold War. From the 1945 to 1962, before the crisis of Missile in Cuba, it was the theory of limited use of the nuclear energy. Everyone wants to get the nuclear but in a limited use. After the war, the crisis of Missile in Cuba, there was the Treaty of Non-Proliferation, which we should not develop the nuclear energy. Even if I would like to remind you, after the Second World War, there are two positions regarding the nuclear energy. There was the Soviet position and the American position. The American position was that we are not going to develop more nuclear energy for making arms. But the Soviet Union said, no, we should destroy what we have right now. And they said, no. That is why in 1949, the Soviet Union has fabricated its nuclear arm after the Great Britain did arms in 1955, was in 1962, I think. This is a good problem. We don't have time to analyze the problem of nuclear energy, but it is fundamental. It is fundamental. It is fundamental how to manage. That's the reason why in 1959, the United Nations created the International Agency for Nuclear Energy in order to manage. But there is a contradiction in the nuclear. India in Pakistan said that they were going to develop a civil use of the nuclear, meanwhile they develop their military capacity. When the state said that it will develop, make a civil use of this energy, it can do it for the military. That is, this can happen with Iran. It's a problem. But I said, Mersheimer, you don't know the intention of the other state. This is a good problem. You cannot know the intention of the other. When they tell you you're gonna make a civil use of nuclear energy, it can do it. It can make a military use of the nuclear. This is a good problem. The energy capacity. That's why, for example, Foreign Affairs has published an article about the problem, the nuclear problem, because it is related to strategy. In China, for example, it is interesting to remind you that in his speech of the UN Assembly, the foreign minister of China said that China has doctrine. It doesn't. It's not going to use first the nuclear arm. It is very complicated. It is very complicated.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Let's thank Dr. Mezilas.